Today I'm talking about gun restrictions. How many people in this class have ever shot a gun or actually own a gun? I myself own guns and I've used guns as a living in the United States Army. Today you actually will see on Facebook, news, and even newspapers a lot of homicide occurring. Doesn't matter if it's between police or just shooting somebody getting shot in general. Today, the one thing I will say that most people don't understand is that there's not enough gun laws. Gun laws don't really exist when it comes to certain issues, including homicide. But today, one thing I would say is that there's not enough gun laws regarding suicides, women being protected from domestic abuse and stalkers, and how much it actually costs our government, and let alone us in general, because there's not enough gun laws. In 2013, there was a total of 3,636 firearm deaths. Out of that, 63% of them were suicides. Why? There's not enough gun laws protecting those who actually own guns or, in general, use them or whatever in case of the guns. Where do suicides usually occur? 63% of owners in Wyoming are actually considered suicide deaths, unfortunately. So how do we stop those who actually are committing suicide? According to the CDC, if we implement background checks for ammunition purchases, it could reduce deaths by a projected percentage of 81%. If we also give all gun owners an actual identification card, we can reduce deaths by 83%. That's just suicides alone. I mean, you can only imagine 63% of people actually being killed or killing themselves because they don't know you're buying too much ammunition or whatever the situation is. So we need to be able to find a way to actually prevent it by creating a gun law. But unfortunately, everybody clashes when it comes to our government system. Another big thing too is stalkers and domestic abusers. I'm not sure if everybody remembers this, but Christina Grimmie was a music pop star who actually starred on The Voice, was killed by her stalker. How did that happen? Nobody knows. How did the person get away with a gun? Nobody knows, unfortunately. But today, there are more than a dozen states prohibiting possession of firearms by domestic violence misdemeanors, and 5 states specifically requiring abusers to render firearms when convicted of domestic violence misdemeanors. Why is it just in minimal states? It's basically the federal government implemented a law, states are now taking charge of it. Since our federal government does not actually have a set-in-stone law, so states are making it mandatory. 3 more states have enacted laws to facilitate the reporting of domestic violence misdemeanors to databases for background checks. So now if somebody gets convicted of domestic violence, now if they try to go to another state and buy a firearm, they can't. Now they're trying to implement it to where it's all in databases. They run their name, their background, it's going to pop up if they have something so they can't buy a new firearm. But as of right now, it's only states, it's not federal. So as of right now, somebody can commit a crime, domestic abuse in Texas, and they can go to Arizona and buy a gun. Because of no gun control, 5 women are murdered with guns every day in the United States. American women are also 11.4 times more likely to be victims of gun homicides. So what I'm saying is if we were able to actually implement new laws stating that if we actually database everything federally, nobody who commits a crime, any type of crime, can actually get away and buy a new gun and commit new murders. I don't know about you, but I like my money in my pocket. I like having a fat wallet that looks like an old phone books. I'm not sure how many people actually remember phone books. I'm old, so I understand what a phone book looked like. But today alone, more money is being spent on putting more police officers on the street, security at campuses. If you haven't noticed, we actually have more security on our campus now because of gun safety. Malls are requiring more safety. Medical service, you haven't noticed, you go to the emergency room, which I've been there Monday and Tuesday all day with my kids, it seems to be more packed. There's more and more doctors now being hired due to the fact of the high homicide rate in the United States. On average, if we were to actually charge gun owners $140 annually for registration fees on their guns, we applied only to 23.1 million gun transactions a year. We can generate almost $3.2 billion in annual revenue. that can cut costs to almost a $5 billion deficit that we're currently in as of right now, according to all the homicides that are going on. It's like I found, gun violence costs each person in the United States $564. So what you guys don't realize, as we're sitting right here, you guys just lost $564 because somebody out there just got killed. That's also costing the government $5.5 billion in lost tax revenue. Also, due to no gun restriction, homicide rates doubling to be associated with 12% decline in property values. So because of the homicides, we're actually losing money on our own actual homes or wherever we live. So today, I basically talked to you guys about the increase in suicide because of lack of gun control. Increase of domestic abuse and stalkers today because of lack of gun control, as well as the loss of tax revenue and our own money in our own pockets due to lack of gun control. So I'm basically saying we are actually, in this election alone, I believe there's actually been a lot of gun control laws being voted on. Unfortunately, in the past couple elections, they all been declined. Thank you.
$140.
540. 540. 565.
140 for the annual registration is what he was talking about.
Per gun?
That's what, yeah, that's his proposal. Or somebody's anyway.
Remember, usually gun guys don't want more laws.
But then it's 6 years of youth gun use. I've seen the unfortunate wait on both. So that's why
Okay. Trevor, the topic area is clear, but what's not clear is the proposition that you're talking about. I can see generally that you are in favor of some kind of gun restriction, or that there's an argument that some kind of gun laws would be effective at reducing a variety of problems. And I think that, you know, that's not a complicated claim to make, but it's not one that's made very clearly at the beginning of the speech. You kind of go backwards, you know, and say, well, we don't have enough gun laws to prevent suicide. There's not enough gun laws to stop stalkers. There's not enough gun laws to protect women, you know, that sort of thing. I'm going, okay, so what's the affirmative claim that you were making? That more gun laws would reduce these problems. That's what your claim should be. And I don't really see anything that is that straightforward here. It's all kind of this sort of backing into the argument and explaining what the controversy is without necessarily telling us what the inference is that you want us to draw. I guess that's kind of a preview of what the contents are going to be. I don't think, again, that those are stated very clearly as claims. They are subject areas that are going to come up, and I can tell that, you know, that will be part of the argument, but I don't know what the claim on each of them is. Now, when you get to what I guess is the first one, you start talking about suicides. You know, I know that that's the subject area, but once again, so what's the gun restriction that would reduce suicides? That's what you need to say is your claim. And you do have buried in your argument something that says if we had restrictions on registration for ammunition sales or something like that would reduce suicide. Okay, well then say that. Since we're talking about that right now, I have no idea how that works. You've got evidence that says you've got a statistic, by the way, that's the one source that you gave, the CDC, but the statistic says it would reduce it by 81%, and then there was an 83%. And I'm going, but that doesn't tell me how. That seems like a very spurious statistic without some explanation about what this law would do. You know, the idea that if we force people to register when they buy ammunition, that's going to stop 81% of suicides, and what is the connection there? It's not clear to me how that happens. Is the for example, are people when they register going to be identifiable as being suicidal or having a mental issue or something like that, and then we would prevent the sale? Or, you know, I don't know how that statistic is arrived at. And so a number that's dropped in there, and you do give it a source on that, but without any explanation, it's not very convincing. So I think you need to have something more there. It's a little bit confusing when you talk about the background checks and domestic violence, and we're back to the same kind of issue here. I don't think that this is a complicated claim, and it becomes complicated because you just don't make that simple declarative sentence. Interstate background checks for domestic violence would reduce violence against women. That's your claim. All right? And then the first part of that argument should be, we don't have these kinds of restrictions. You do mention that 18 states have this. I assume that a whole bunch of states don't have background checks for domestic violence, sorts of things. And your argument is that if we had a national database on those sorts of things, that would prevent it. I need some evidence that supports that. You say somebody could go over to another state if they were prevented in their own state from buying a gun and get one and then commit domestic violence. Do you have any examples of that happening in the 18 states where they do have these kinds of background checks so that we can see that this is in fact the source of the problem? Or, for example, did people already own the guns before they were convicted of the domestic violence and nobody took their guns away from them, which is a different issue? That could potentially solve the problem. But that's not really what you're talking about. You're back to the background check sort of thing, and there has to be an explanation about how that's going to work and a demonstration that we have a problem here that is connected to this. I'm a little iffy. The example of the stalker, that's a dramatic case. The voice star is killed by a stalker, but then you acknowledge nobody knows who this guy was, how he got his gun, what's going on. I'm going, well, how do we know then that anything that you're talking about would address that particular issue? If we don't know what's going on, how do we decide what's going to work in this particular situation? And I don't think that you have built the argument there. You've randomly picked out some incidents and events that I think draw attention to gun violence, but you haven't done the work that shows that the policies that you're talking about would work, which is the claim that you're making. I don't know that there's any controversy that there is gun violence. Nobody's going to be disputing that part, or that these events or situations occur. Nobody's disputing that. The question is going to be, will the things that you're talking about work to prevent that? And that's the case that I think you need to build up a little bit more. And then you get a little bit into kind of a side issue, which is another policy proposal to charge people who own guns for registering their guns, and then we'll have a whole bunch of money to do crap with. And that sounds like a completely separate issue from what we're talking about here. And the idea of a tax or a fee that people would have to pay to fund something is not necessarily a bad idea, although I do think the funding needs to be probably directed towards gun-related issues, because if you just said, if we charged everybody $140 for every gun they had, we'd have an extra, whatever, I forget what your number was, X number of billions of dollars. Well, yeah, if we charged everybody $140 for every hat that they owned, we'd have X billions of dollars too. Does that mean that that's something that's right or just or good thing to do? I think you're off on a side issue there that isn't related to your claim about whether or not this would be effective. So I think you need to be, that would have been a point that I would have taken out of the speech. All right. Thank you.